Hello, and welcome back to a brand new one-round damage challenge. Last time, we asked a pretty simple question. How much damage can the Alchemist do in one round? And while that experiment got a little explosive, we're not done testing the limits just yet, because today, we're putting Pathfinder 2e's newest class, the Animist, under the same microscope. On paper, Animist is a spirit-channeling spellcaster class, focused more on versatility and flavor than raw power. Its main claim to fame is being able to mix prepared spellcasting with prepared spontaneous spellcasting, based off of what apparitions they choose to attune to at the beginning of the day. But we're here to figure out if we can twist that versatility and see just how hard the Animist can hit. In this video, we'll dig up the class's best offensive options, calculate how much damage it can push out, and see whether the Animist can stand toe-to-toe with some of the more damage-centric classes. So grab your dice, summon your apparition, and without further ado, let's get started. Actually, before we start, let's take a second to review our rules and add a few updates. Last time, we kept things as simple as possible, and we're sticking with that same foundation here. Just like before, we're measuring one full round of combat against Bob. That means we can count any damage dealt during our turn, plus anything that triggers during Bob's turn, like reactions and end-of-turn effects. Also like before, Bob still has every trait in the game, so he conveniently counts as undead, dragon, fiend, or whatever else we need for our abilities to work. And he'll automatically roll the results that best suit our calculations. It might sound like a cursed existence, but before you start feeling bad for him, remember, Bob absolutely deserves this, due to a choice he made in his backstory that I'm still not going to get into. Before we dive into the main build, there are two rules that I think we need to clarify. The first one is something that we used last time but didn't properly explain, and the second one is a brand new rule that changes things up a bit. Rule 1, remember, we have unlimited prep time before the fight starts, but what I forgot to explain is the moment we do any actual damage to Bob, that clock begins. This will keep things from getting too ridiculous. Otherwise, in the Alchemist video, we could have just hit Bob with every poison in existence and waited until each of those poisons reached their maximum duration. Rule 2, and this is where things get changed up a bit. From now on, we're going to test these classes on their own merits, meaning we'll no longer be using multi-class archetypes for our builds. This keeps comparisons fair and stops everything from blending together. Let's be honest, seeing Magus or Exemplar slapped onto every martial build, or every spellcaster dipping into a multi-class for the best spell list, would get old pretty quickly. Other archetypes, though, are still perfectly fine. This means that the Alchemist won't exactly be valid for comparison, but on the bright side, it means that we can make another video using the new rules for Alchemist and harvest that sweet, sweet watch time. I mean, get a fair comparison. Finally, one last disclaimer before we begin. Bob is dumb. Like, really dumb. A huge portion of this build's damage will come from Bob doing something unbelievably stupid. And that's okay with me. This build is purely theory crafting, not a practical build. If you came here looking for a genuinely optimized Blastercaster setup, you're in the wrong place. We're just here to make the number go up. Alright, so let's dive into the build by starting with our ancestry. Last time we went with Goblin Duskwalker to combine the Quietest Strikes feat from Duskwalker with the Burn It and Torch Goblin's feat from Goblin. This time, however, we don't have access to the energy mutagens, so those fire-based feats aren't nearly as useful. Instead, we'll be going with Orc for the feat Lifeblood's Call, which adds twice the sum of our wounded and doomed values as a circumstance bonus to our melee strikes. It just so happens that when our Animist runs into Bob, he's in the middle of a ritual conveniently keeping him teetering on the brink of death for a maximum bonus of +8. Lucky, right? Also, we still will be getting the Quietest Strikes bonus through the Duskwalker heritage, and while we won't be using it this time, an honorable mention goes out to the Bloody Blows feat, which will add 1d4 persistent bleed damage to any unarmed strikes that we make that critically hit. Definitely something worth keeping in mind for future builds. Last time, we picked up the Fated Rival background, but since that provides another circumstance bonus to damage, it won't stack here. Unfortunately, there isn't really a background that fits better for our setup, so our choice of background becomes a bit of a wash. Wait, the Animist is one of the most versatile spellcasters in the entire game, so why don't we just take a bunch of feats that boost our melee strikes? Are we really going to ignore all those unique spellcasting options just to punch something a bunch of times? Well, no. We're not going to avoid all of them, just most of them. Instead, we're focusing on the Animist's Capstone ability, Supreme Incarnation, which grants us a 10th rank spell that can only be used to cast Avatar. That might sound oddly restrictive, but here's the twist. Animist can access to unique Avatar forms depending on which apparition they channel. And for our build, that means we'll get the General of Endless Battle from the Witness to Ancient Battles apparition. Technically, there are other forms that deal even more average damage, but the General's form comes with a crucial edge. Its strikes have the Fatal trait, which turns all of their damage dice into D12s on a crit. And since Bob's Curse guarantees our critical hits, that means each of our attacks are now 6d12 plus 6, doubled, plus another d12 of damage. We're not completely ignoring the rest of the Animist toolkit though. We'll be taking medium practice to gain access to the Relinquish Control feat at level 1, which, when combined with the Invocation of Synchronization feature at level 17, gives us a plus 2 damage bonus to all of our strikes. At level 2, we'll pick up Spirit Familiar for a Cat Familiar. This will be important later, so keep it in mind. Then, Embodiment of the Balance adds both heal and harm to our apparition spell list, and lets us heighten them accordingly. And our next Animist ability won't come into play until level 16, when we grab Spiritual Spell Shape Stance, allowing us to reduce the action cost of adding spell shape effects to our spells once per round. And finally, we'll cap things off with the True Channel Spell Capstone feat, granting us an additional 10th rank spell slot, but this one can be used for any divine spell, rather than being reserved specifically for Avatar. Alright, that's 4 feats down out of the 10 that we get, which leaves us just enough room for 2 archetypes of our choice. First, we'll pick up Time Mage Dedication, granting us access to future spell learning, letting us add haste and a few other time-bending spells to our repertoire. We'll also grab Into the Future, a feat which allows us to add an extra action to a spell, in exchange for delaying its effect until the start of our next turn. Normally that delay would be a pretty situational ability. If you need a spell, you usually need it right then, but for our purposes, this will help us out with the problem that we're going to run into later. We have room for 1 more archetype with 3 more feat slots, and unfortunately, we couldn't find something to fill those slots. The best I could think of was Assassin Dedication, giving us the Mark for Death and Sneak Attack features on our strikes, but that would lock us into Assassin for the other 2 feats, and there's not really any other damage boosting feats there. We'll take it, but this is definitely the part of the build that has the most opportunity for growth. Alright, now let's talk spells, because this ultimate combo isn't going to work without some very specific prep. Here's what we'll need to make it work. It doesn't really matter what we prepare in our first rank spell slots, but at 2nd rank we need Share Life, and then at 4th rank we need the Anointed Ground spell. 5th rank gets Infused Vitality, 6th rank gets Blood Spray Curse and Seal Fate, 7th rank gets Inexhaustible Cynicism and Haste, which we can prepare thanks to future spell learning. 8th rank gets Organ Sight and Warrior's Regret. 9th rank gets Suspended Retribution and Inevitable Disaster. And then at 10th rank, we cap the spell off with Weapon of Judgment. Each of these spells will play a key role in stacking buffs, debuffs, and conditional effects to squeeze every drop of damage we can out of this build, but we'll break down exactly how they interact once we start piecing the combo together. Alright, with all the setup out of the way, let's get to the main event. When we last left Bob, he was afflicted by about 5 different poisons, impaled by pickaxes, and left for dead. But if there's one thing Bob has proven, it's that he is annoyingly resilient. Somehow, he survives, but barely, and he drags himself off away in search of sustenance. Fortunately for Bob, he stumbles upon a healing spring, a place renowned for its restorative powers. Unfortunately for him, he's not alone. Our Animist, the guardian of the sacred spring, finds Bob greedily drinking from the waters. The moment they see him, they understand the danger. Bob's curse isn't just clinging to him, it's threatening to corrupt the very spirits that give the spring its healing magic. If he's allowed to remain here, this corruption can spread and undo everything the spirits have worked so hard to preserve. Bob must be stopped. So our Animist marks him for death and begins his prep. Our Animist opens the fight by casting Seal Fate, which Bob of course critically fails, giving him a weakness 3 to slashing damage, which sets the tone for what's about to come. Next, we set up the combo by casting Share Life on our familiar, followed by Warrior's Regret, making sure to tell Bob that if he harms our familiar from now on, that we will share in the pain. Then, we add Inexhaustible Cynicism to the mix. From this point forward, we can safely assume that Bob is spending 1 action on each of his turns, suppressing that effect. Even Bob isn't dumb enough to ignore damage if he's not doing anything else with his actions. Our next few rounds are dedicated purely to setup. We cast Blood Spray Curse, Infuse Vitality, Haste, Organ Sight, and Suspended Retribution, setting the trigger for when Bob uses athletics actions. We cast Weapon of Judgment, choosing Peace, and finally, we cast Inevitable Disaster. Did I say finally? I meant finally before things start getting tricky, because now we want to enter Avatar form and start tearing Bob a new one. But once we transform, we lose access to our spells, meaning we can't use our powerful damaging options like Holy Light or Rip the Spirit. To get around that, we're going to use our Time Mage feat, Into the Future, which when used in combination with Spiritual Spell Shape Stance, allows us to future cast a 1-action harm spell that will go off at the start of our next turn. And then, we finally transform into Avatar form. At this point, Bob takes a break from guzzling spirit water and finally notices our familiar is a cat. And Bob loves cats. He immediately goes to hug it, which, unfortunately for him, counts as a grapple and both a hostile action, triggering Weapon of Judgment, and an athletics check, triggering Suspended Retribution. The result? Bob immediately takes 100 points of slashing damage and 200 mental damage. And since that slashing damage came from a spell, Organ's Sight adds another 108 damage. Bloodspray Curse adds 18 more, plus 3 to 6 persistent damage. And Seal Fate chips in another 3 damage from his weakness. That's 429 total damage, and Bob has only taken a single action. Oh, and he critically failed his check, so now he's prone. Most creatures would look at 429 damage and reconsider their life choices. But not Bob. Bob is determined to play with that cat. On his second action, he playfully tries to trip the cat. Another hostile action and another athletics check. That triggers Weapon of Judgment and Suspended Retribution again, though this time without all the added effects, for only 303 more damage. In his enthusiasm, Bob actually manages to critically succeed, knocking the cat prone and dealing 1d6 bludgeoning damage. But don't worry, animal lovers, this is exactly why we set up Share Life, as we take half of that damage for ourselves. Finally, for his third action, Bob goes for another grapple. He fails naturally, and takes 305 more damage for the effort. But remember that haste we cast earlier? Since it was a 7th rank haste, we can actually quicken multiple people in addition to ourselves, and we chose to give Bob an extra action. Bob can only use this action to stride or strike, but since he's prone on the ground, striding is off the table. And while Bob loves cats too much to actually try to hurt them, for the sake of this damage test, let's say he flails in the direction of our cat in something resembling a strike. He misses, of course, and takes another 305 damage. At the end of his turn, Bloodspray Curse hits him for 18 bleed damage, and Warrior's Regret triggers for 64 more, since Bob has harmed both us and our familiar thanks to Share Life. And, because in all this pain, Bob forgot to suspend an action suppressing inexhaustible cynicism, he takes another 64 damage. By the time Bob's turn ends, he's taken a grand total of 1,464 damage. And it's still not over, because now, we get a turn. First of all, on our turn we start things off by relinquishing control as a free action, locking us in to spending in all of our actions on strikes. But before that happens, our future spell from previous round goes off. That's a 1-action, 9th rank harm spell, kicking things off with 144 damage. Then, we make our 3 strikes, plus our 1 extra from haste, each dealing 168 damage on a crit, plus 2 damage from Quiet Strikes, 16 from Lifeblood's Call, 4 from Invocation of Synchronization, and don't forget the 3 more from Bob's slashing weakness, courtesy of Seal Fate. And don't forget our 1d6 of sneak attack damage added to each strike and then doubled because of the crit. Add it all up, and our 4 strikes deal a total of 1,556 damage. And that would be the end of our turn, but wait. Out of the woods comes a wild badger, apparently mistaking Bob's flailing agony for some sort of mating dance. And unfortunately for Bob, the badger is not impressed. It proceeds to maul him, dealing 190 points of slashing damage, plus another 3 damage from the Seal Fate weakness. All in all, we've thrown everything we've got into Bob, dealing a grand total of 3,265 damage. Bob is lying on the ground, cut to ribbons, bleeding out, and completely unaware of what he did to deserve this grievous fate. He opens his eyes, just in time to see the cat that he so desperately wanted to play with begins padding softly toward him. Could it be? Could this spirit cat be offering him one final act of mercy? Our spirit cat gently climbs onto Bob's chest, sits down, begins to purr. Bob, with the last of his strength, reaches up to pet the cat. And the cat locks eyes with him and casts a 5th rank harm spell. You see, like all familiars, our spirit cat has 2 familiar abilities. In this case, it has Independent, giving it 1 action each round to use however it wants, and Spellcasting, giving it a 5th rank spell slot that it can use to cast one of our actions. Put those 2 together, and right before our turn ends, our cat can squeeze out 80 more damage, bringing our ultimate damage total to 3,273 damage. So, what did we learn? The Animist might not have the spell list with the flashiest nuke spells, but when you combine the incredibly strong avatar forms mixed with all the delayed effect spells, and just a tad bit of creative cruelty, you get a class that can definitely keep up with the most explosive of damage classes. Last time, our alchemist melted Bob under a mountain of volatile concoctions, and was even allowed to mix in feats from other classes. And somehow, the Animist managed to outdo even that by mixing spirit magic, time magic, and a cat with a grudge. What makes this build really special isn't just the raw numbers though. It's how every moving part comes together to make it happen. Every archetype feat, every apparition choice, every little damage all feed into a massive payoff. And honestly, that's what I love about Pathfinders 2e. Even when you think a class is built around support or flavor, There's always a way to turn it into a powerhouse if you're willing to dig deep enough. If you enjoyed watching Bob suffer in the name of science, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps appease the algorithmic spirits and tells me that you want to see more of these deep damage dive builds. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already, so that you don't miss our next episode of How Much Damage Can They Do in One Round. But that's all for this time. Until next time, keep rolling high, and we'll catch you in the next one.